Val, I think you're on mute.
Oh, I'm on mute. Sorry, everybody. Hello, everybody. My name is Valerie Zimmer. I'm with the State Water Board. This is our second listening session. I want to welcome everybody to this listening session. We are largely going to be discussing what we did during the last listening session. We're going to give folks a chance to hear our presentation who have not had the chance previously. So for those of you who may have been in previous sessions, you will hear a lot of the same information, although there may be new comments and new discussion, and maybe a few updates if we have some time. We don't have a ton of updates because that was only a couple of weeks ago. And so I wanted to welcome everybody. Tonight we'll have presentations from the State Water Board. John Murphy will be presenting, and CDFW Jennifer Garcia is also here, and she was not presenting at the last one, so that will be a little bit of a new stuff for tonight. So the agenda tonight is we're going to be giving a presentation, and then we will be taking Q&A at the end of the presentation. Just so you're all aware, you're all on mute. So if you have a comment or a question at the end of the presentation, you will have to raise your hand using the chat function. I think if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a raise hand function. You can also chat your question in the chat. And if that doesn't work, you can send an email. And the email is on the screen at clearlakehitch@waterboards.ca.gov. So that's how you will be able to reach us. We have folks monitoring the chat for questions and comments. Just so some ground rules, this is not a formal public comment period. We're really hoping to open up a dialogue. We're not really going to be limiting your time. So we want to facilitate some discussion. So there might be some back and forth, some questions and answers. And we'll see where it goes, and hopefully we have a fruitful discussion. We do ask that, people, when they're making comments or asking questions, that they are respectful. We know that there are some differing opinions, and but I think everybody that's here is here with a genuine interest in helping the Hitch. So just keep that in mind. We're not trying to have a debate, but we are trying to hear people out and have some discussion, get some ideas, and just learn more about the Hitch on our own. We're asking for help. Okay. I guess next slide. So the presentation, we'll have a 5 minutes on sort of a little bit of an overview, 20 minutes on sort of some of the data we've seen so far, just a very, very high level overview of the problem, potential causes, other data. We'll also talk about some of our proposed actions and what we might need from others. And then at the end will be the discussion. We'll talk about what we've done so far, what our call to action is, and we'll be opening it up for discussion. The next slide, please. So some of you may be familiar with the California Water Boards. Others of you are probably not familiar with it. So this is a map. The California Water Boards consists of one state board, that's where I'm from, and 9 regional boards. So a regional board for Clear Lake would be Region 5, because Clear Lake is part of the Sacramento watershed. The state board, sets statewide wide policy. If there's a water quality issue that's covering the entire state, the state board would be involved. The regional boards generally deal with water quality in their regions. So both the state board and the water board have some say on what happens with water quality, but it really just depends on the scale of it. The state board also permits and regulates public drinking water systems, and we administer the California water rights system as well, which includes issuing permits to divert surface water, curtailing water use during the drought, and protecting the public trust. Public trust refers to all kinds of values that might be shared by the people of the state of California, including protecting fish. We also provide financial and technical assistance for all kinds of projects, including here in the drinking water system and water recycling, all kinds of things. So that's basically what we do. Next slide too, please. In Lake County, primarily the work has been through the regional boards. So the blue are regional boards areas of what they take care of, and the sort of black are what we deal with. So the regional boards have a managing water quality in the form of TMDLs, total maximum daily load requirements, the irrigated lands program, and waste discharge requirements. They also participate on the Blue Ribbon panel, which is a multi-agency, multi-group panel that's been working on, I think, issues in the lake itself. You know, the state board, we manage water rights, we manage flows, and we're working on protecting the Hitch and asking for your help. Today's presentation is being hosted by the State Water Board, but we have staff from CDFW here as well, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and we've had a lot of input from the regional board as well. So this is a water-focused presentation. You may be aware of other problems with the Clear Lake Hitch, but you know that we are the water board, so we're going to be worried about water in particular. So just kind of taking it back a little bit, most of you that are in the room are here because you care about the Hitch, and most likely you've been aware of these problems with the Hitch for a long time, much longer than us. And so we're kind of a little bit behind on addressing this issue. We were more or less alerted in early December during the summit. And since then, we've been working very hard to catch up and try to figure out what we could do to help prevent the extinction of the Hitch. But I'll be frank, we're going to need help from people, from people in the county, people who are experts, people who have land. And so that's why we're here today. We're basically hosting this listening session to learn more about the Hitch and to share with you what we know. And we would like to find a path forward to help the Hitch. Okay, next slide, please. So most of you are probably aware of what the Hitch is, but if you're not, this is a brief introduction. I am not a fish biologist or an expert by any means, but the Clear Lake Hitch is also called chive. It is a large minnow that is about 12 inches long, can weigh up to a pound, and lives about 6 years. What's unique about this minnow is that it is found only in Clear Lake. It's not found outside of the Clear Lake area. And so if it's not doing well in Clear Lake, that's it. That's it for the Clear Lake Hitch. Of course, the Clear Lake Hitch is culturally and ecologically important. I think most of you are aware of that. I can't really speak to how important it is, but you know, this is a part of a way of life in Clear Lake for the tribes. I think most people that live in the watershed can look back and know a time when there were a lot of Clear Lake Hitch in the streams running in the spring. And it's part of the lake's food chain as well, for people and for other animals. It spawns and rears in the spring. So the fish come out of the lake, they go upstream, and they lay their eggs in streams and gravel. The eggs take about 14 days to hatch, and juveniles can, in theory, return to the lake in 14 days, but often they spend a little bit more time in the streams than that. So they have been found in the streams through the summer in some cases. We think that the Clear Lake Hitch overall used to number in the millions. We certainly know that the runs in each tributary were in the tens of thousands. And so it's not too hard to start adding up these different tributaries and realize that not every fish runs every year, and to think that this used to be quite an abundant population of fish. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. I'm going to pass this on to John Murphy from State Water Board, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Val. Yeah, so this is John Murphy. I'm a senior engineering geologist with the State Water Board. I am in the enforcement section, so myself and my staff will be taking a look at some enforcement activities throughout the Clear Lake watershed this year. But this is kind of an all hands on deck situation, so we're kind of doing a little bit of everything at the moment. So to go more into some of the data, we've looked at so far. So as Val noted, we kind of became apprised of this situation back in early December. And so the next few slides are kind of a summary of some preliminary data analysis and findings that we've come up with so far in our 8 weeks or so working on this project. This project definitely has a lot of collaboration, including on this slide. So this slide is data from the United States Geological Survey. The researcher there is Fred Fire, who we've been in contact with. And essentially what we're looking at is research going back to 2017. This is when a lot of research kind of began at the beginning of this most current drought. But we know going back to the 40s, as Val mentioned, there used to be millions. We know decline has been happening at least since the 40s, maybe even earlier. And we can see this with some more rigid scientific analyses over the past few years. So what we're looking at in this graph here is a chart that measures number of Hitch caught going back to 2017, skip 2020 because of COVID restrictions. But what we can see if we start at 2017, so if we look at this graph here, the vertical or the y-axis is the count, so number of fish caught in nets, and then the horizontal or x-axis is the length, measured length of the fish. So of course, the longer the fish is, the more likely it's an adult. A shorter length would indicate a juvenile. So this black dashed line, kind of on the left third, indicates the separation between what we classify the Hitch as a juvenile or an adult. So if you look at 2017, quite a few juveniles were caught that year in 2017, not so many adults. But then when you go to 2018, we see what we would predict. We now have a healthy adult population. However, what you do see in 2018 is not a healthy juvenile population. And then as you move to 2019, 2021, and 2022, numbers dwindled quite significantly. So we see a healthy population of juveniles or smaller fish in 2017. They move forward into 2018, but then something happens and we're not seeing this population reboom. A lot of factors that could be involved here. We're going to go into those in a few slides, but this is definitely cause for concern. California hasn't lost a species in 50 years. That species was also a fish in Clear Lake. And we know there's a problem. We know we don't have perfect data. We know we don't have perfect data analysis, but that can prevent us from moving forward and trying to come up with some solutions. Hopefully collaboratively working with growers, working with the tribes, working with other state agencies to try to identify some feasible solutions that can help out sustainably and a permanent fix. So if we go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's likely quite a few problems impacting Hitch population. So this is some information we've received. Some of it's anecdotally, some of it's some narrative, some of it's data of some factors that are impacting the Hitch in the population and potential factors with the decline over the past few years, or maybe even go back, almost 100 years. So we were also out in the field last week. So we spent 3 days in the Clear Lake watershed. So we were able to kind of take a look at some of these issues as well. But, what we've heard from all stakeholders that we've talked to are this issue with flow barriers. So this means possibly things like culverts being filled with gravel that doesn't allow fish passage. Maybe we've heard a lot and saw some stream bed alteration issues, some of which were not, of course, permitted with CDFW or Fish and Wildlife, and we'll talk more about that later. And also some dams. So maybe some dams aren't constructed in a manner that is conducive to fish passage. So we looked at in Kelseyville, like the Main Street Bridge has a fish passage barrier that might need some work or some modifications. We looked at like the Kelseyville detention basin and that structure there that could be causing some fish passage issues. But basically, there's a lot of flow barriers. So what flow barrier means is that some sort of hindrance or blocking of the fish to move upstream. The minnow, it is a pretty small fish, and it's not great at jumping. It's not as good as like a salmon, so it does need some pretty specific passage construction in any sort of man-made structure. But of course, the number one issue that we're looking at is there's just simply not enough water in the streams or the headwaters to support spawning activities and migration up tributaries or creeks. So a lot of that can be, of course, climate driven. We've been in a pretty significant drought the past few years. We know there's also water that is diverted for beneficial uses through a permit. We're hearing that there is also diversions of water that might not be legal, and we're looking into those as well. And also just looking at the characteristics of the streams and the soils in the area. This was a pretty big mining area for gravel. So there's a lot of these coarse rocks that have a lot of pore space or holes in them. And so it's very easy for surface water to kind of what we call lose to groundwater. So if there isn't sufficient flow of surface water, it can seep into the ground. So that can be another issue that we're seeing here. Habitat degradation, maybe going back to gold mining days. So there's been a lot of mining in the Clear Lake watershed, especially for gravel, also for some mercury as well during the 1800s, late 1800s. There's also been significant land use changes going back several decades. A lot of this has been for agriculture, of course, but also maybe some levee development, flood control structures that have gone in as well. That would be more under the jurisdiction of possibly Department of Water Resources or the county. And another issue that's impacting Clear Lake is predation and competition with invasive species. For example, we know Clear Lake's a world-renowned bass fishing spot. There's also a pretty significant carp issue that we learned about last week. And these are potential predators that can eat the hitch, especially juvenile hitch. So that's another factor. And then, of course, pollution. I mentioned the mercury mine. There are legacy mercury issues in Clear Lake. And there's also harmful algal blooms or HABs, which we see more into the summer months. But what these can do, this is a result of kind of nutrient loading and some other factors that depletes oxygen in the lake. And of course, fish need oxygen to survive. So the more harmful algal blooms there are, the more likely we're going to have fish kill events, as we have seen in like August timeframe in Clear Lake. So that's another issue. Next slide, please. So here's an example of a fish kill. It's not the only example. This one is specifically on Adobe Creek from 2014. One anecdote from this picture here. So this was collected by a fish and wildlife biologist, Ben Ewing. And Ben was actually out at this exact location 1 week prior to this fish kill event. And at that point, just 7 days before, the stream was so high and flowing so fast that he was not able to safely get into the stream to take flow measurements or collect fish samples. So over the course of a week, we can see these kind of losses in these stream systems here. So these are kind of very flashy systems, and I think we're seeing it right now as well. We had a lot of rain December, January time period, and the streams, while they were very full, they are starting to drop, and flows are starting to drop, and we're losing water already, even after quite significant storms the past few weeks. So what causes these streams to deplete so quickly? We don't know. We're looking into it. We're collecting data. We're trying to figure out groundwater surface water interaction issues. We're looking at the data from the groundwater sustainability plan that was submitted to Department of Water Resources as a way to manage groundwater withdrawals in the basin, specifically the Big Valley Basin. So there's a lot of factors involved here that we're looking into and we'll be asking for more data on in collaboration. Next slide, please. But, you know, pick your cliche, there isn't going to be a silver bullet here. There's a lot of factors. There's a lot of potential solutions. Other possible factors could include illegal diversions. We know this is a pretty big cannabis growing area, and not all of that's legal. So we have some cannabis diversions that could be causing some diversions of surface water and some water use. But there's also could be non-cannabis legal diversions. Legally, we have about 230 permitted diversions, surface water diversions in the Clear Lake watershed. So we're taking a look at those permits, seeing what volumes of water are being reported as diverted amounts, and seeing if that could have an impact on surface water availability. We also know that groundwater is the primary source of water use in the Clear Lake area. And there's a lot of agriculture in the Clear Lake area, especially in the Big Valley. Upwards of 98 to 99% of agricultural water supply is estimated to come from groundwater. We don't know the exact groundwater surface water interaction characteristics. However, some preliminary research and findings presented in the groundwater sustainability plan suggests that groundwater is connected to surface water. We know that this is what the GSP calls a groundwater dependent ecosystem, or potentially is. So pumping, of course, is going to vary throughout the year. Agriculturally, that can be for frost protection in the spring, or for later on into the summer, it could be for irrigation use. There is a couple mining operations and 1 or 2 industrial operations as well that can be using some water. And one thing we're looking at is, so since most of the water use is from groundwater, though groundwater is extracted by pumps or wells, or pumps and wells. And typically the closer the well is to a stream or a surface water body, the more of an impact that is going to have on depleting surface water availability. So we're looking at those kind of characteristics. And when it comes to irrigation season or even frost protection, chances are probably quite high that everybody's going to turn their pumps on at the same time, which can cause more of an instantaneous effect on surface water availability and drawing away surface water or groundwater that would become surface water. So we're taking a look at some well data, proximity to surface water streams, pumping rates, well sizes, things like that to get a better handle on groundwater pumping. And of course, there could be other possible factors. We're still pretty new in this research and this project. So part of why we're having this listening session is to hear from you, those who actually live in the basin, to tell us other factors that we should probably be looking at. For example, we heard last week when we were doing some field visits, we know there's a lot of invasive vegetation in the area. So maybe we need some vegetation removal. A lot of that vegetation is also comprised of very thirsty plants that used to be controlled with burning by tribal nations historically. That hasn't really happened in the past 150 years or so. So we're open to other possible factors. That's part of why we'll have a Q&A period. If there are other factors you think are impacting the Hitch, please let us know. We'd be glad to hear about it and take a closer look. Next slide. So in an effort to try and narrow in our focus or our study area, we've identified 5 key tributaries or streams to take a closer look at. I think these are in clockwise order here, but starting in the Big Valley Basin, or kind of the southwest area of the lake near Kelseyville. So we have Kelsey Creek, Adobe Creek, Manning Creek, Cole, and Middle. And Middle Creek also includes Scott Creek, which flows into Middle Creek. We're kind of looking at both of those. So there might be an argument that we need to put a 6th one on here after some further analysis and discussion with some of the tribes in the area. So this is where we're focusing. Also on this map, what you'll notice is the streams are these dark blue. And we know that Hitch habitat used to extend very far up the watershed and into the headwaters. However, now spawning is much closer to the lake. And so it might be a little hard to see on your screen, but basically if you see a red line, that's kind of the known spawning habitat that we know about from recent years. It's very close to the lake. It doesn't go up nearly as far as it used to. But that does kind of give us a place to target in our initial approach, at least this year. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there are authorized permitted surface water diversions that the Division of Water Rights, which is our unit, oversees. And what we're seeing on this map is entities, people, farms, et cetera, that reported surface water diversions in the year 2021. So today is actually the reporting deadline for the 2022 year. So hopefully we'll have some more recent data here soon, as soon as next week maybe. But this is 2021 during the drought. And basically, if you see a circle on here, they reported some type of diversion to us in their annual report, which is a requirement for some water right types. Different water diversions have been identified in those annual reports, from irrigation and frost protection, domestic and stock watering uses. And then I think there's different categories here. We can definitely go back to the slide if anybody has any further questions on that. But I think I'm going to move to the next slide, please, to talk about frost protection specifically. So we are hearing that frost protection could be a significant impact on surface water availability. The other thing with frost protection is it occurs during the Hitch spawning season. So we are taking a look at water use for frost protection for that reason. So here, if you see a circle, there is a water report, I believe from 2021, that was reported. They reported a diversion for frost protection or spring irrigation. So red circles are specifically called out frost protection in the report. In yellow circle, we're kind of assuming this might be for frost protection because it's water diversion in the spring. It's not really a known irrigation watering season. So these are things we're taking a closer look at. And also, as I mentioned, we're trying to get a better handle on groundwater surface water interaction and trying to see what sort of connection or impact this might have and what sort of solutions we can come up with moving forward. And then I think if we go to the next slide, we're also looking at land use. So downloading data from Department of Water Resources and also the county and taking a look at land use, because the type of land use can give us some insight into the water use or water demand for the watershed. So you'll see here on this graph, this is, I believe, from 2019, but it actually includes data from 2014 to 2019. We're working on getting some more recent data sets, but this is what we have right now. So primary land uses in this area include urban use, vineyards, fruit and nuts, pasture, and then some minor grain and hay. So what's been presented to us is that a lot of the land has been converted to vineyards over the past few years. A lot of this area used to be pear orchards, and a lot of that farmland has since been converted to vineyards, which does use significantly less water for irrigation uses. However, we are seeing quite a bit of a vineyard growth, especially as you move up the watershed. So you'll see the purple here, I believe, is vineyard. So kind of southeast area, we're seeing quite a bit of growth of vineyard farmland in that area. So that could be a source of water use or water diversion. So we're looking at that. We're also, as I mentioned, we're interested in groundwater use. So at this point, we're basically assuming every agricultural property has at least one groundwater well. And that will help us, identify proximity to streams and possible impact that could have. We're also trying to identify possible solutions to reduce groundwater demand, especially for groundwater wells near streams. So we're looking at things like, maybe we can store water or permit water storage to be used so water could be used from storage instead of groundwater, for example, a frost protection event. But we're hoping, of course, agriculture could be part of the solution. So we have been engaged with agricultural stakeholder groups and coalitions to try to get their input and get some data from them. And we do have some data sharing happening so far. So this is land use. We're looking at land use. It's still a work in progress, but we're moving forward here. Next slide, please. But as you might hear a few times in this presentation, we still need some more data. So as a regulatory agency, we are looking into regulatory actions for us to institute or initiate regulatory actions. It does require some pretty sound data analysis that we have to sell to our board. And we don't have all the data that we need to do that just yet. So some other data needs that we're looking at, we need to know diversion volumes, timing and rates. As I mentioned, groundwater surface water interaction understanding, location of wells, their depths and where they're screened or where water is pumped from. Several agricultural groups have also expressed interest in what we're calling pumpbacks, where basically they would pump from their existing groundwater well directly into the stream, which might be a viable solution to help with the spawning efforts of the Hitch. So for that to happen, it will require a permit with the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board, Region 5. There is a general order permit for that, so it is fairly streamlined. There is a cost with it. I'm not sure how much, but we are trying to come up with those types of solutions and information. But that might be a possible solution. And if we have any farmer coalitions or groups or individuals on this call that would be interested in that, please feel free to reach out to us. But data is sparse, especially on surface water data and flow. So we're working on installing some gauges, especially with the Big Valley Band in Adobe and Kelsey Creek. I think we're eyeing some gauging locations. And then we're also going out to conduct our own stream flow measurements hopefully on a weekly basis moving forward to get some good data this spring to help us understand the issue a little bit better and some solutions. Other data needs, it would be great if we could have historical record or logs of fish kill events, when those occurred and what day. Other observations would be great. Also fish rescue events. Any records or logs of frost protection dates would be of great help. And while many might not have this data historically, hopefully moving forward this year, this is data that we can start to collect and compile because it'll be very important as we move forward and develop long-term, more permanent solutions. And it's of course very possible we might have other data needs and other questions that will be needed. So we're asking for these data voluntarily at the moment, and hopefully in a collaborative effort. So we're planning to get some sort of informational letter out about this project to several people, hopefully this month. So right now we're voluntarily asking for this data, but as State Water Board, we do currently have the ability to issue what's called an informational order. And an informational order would require data submission, which I think we're looking maybe March or so, but that's still a work in progress. We're hopeful that some voluntary data submission will happen this month, but there's definitely an ability or a path for us to pursue what's called an informational order. If we do pursue that, there'll be more information coming soon on that approach. Next slide. So that's kind of a high-level summary of everything we looked at over the past 2 or 3 months in our preliminary data analysis. So now I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit and discuss short-term and long-term actions that we are working on to protect the Hitch. So we've already gone through the data part on the past few slides, but the next few slides are going to go into each of these bullets in a little bit more detail. And that includes what we're going to be doing from an enforcement angle, what we're asking for voluntarily or voluntary actions we can ask to keep water in the creeks this year, our collaborative efforts, and possible regulations moving forward. So next slide, please. I think we're going into enforcement. So this is where my unit's going to be focusing. So enforcement, so we step in when there's any sort of diversions that might not be legal or legal diversions that aren't in compliance with their permit. So we are largely a complaint-driven organization, for better or worse. So if we don't know about an issue, there's no way for us to investigate it. So there is a complaint system through California Environmental Protection Agency. I think a chat, yeah, Nick just threw it in a link into the chat. This is how we receive complaints. So if you are aware of illegal diversion, we've heard there's a fair amount of illegal diversions happening throughout the Clear Lake watershed. If you are aware and comfortable, please submit a complaint to Cal EPA or reach out to us directly with our Clear Lake Hitch email address. We'll take a look. And as I mentioned, we have both enforcement on the normal type of enforcement. We also have cannabis enforcement engaged as well. So we can take a closer look and do some investigation. And as I mentioned, diversions, they might be illegal for normal water uses, and they can also be illegal for cannabis. We're also taking a look at possible water storage issues or reservoirs. So if the source is groundwater, it does not, my understanding is it does not require a water right, but if there's any sort of on-stream reservoirs, we're taking a look at those to make sure that they are in compliance with some sort of water right or bringing them into compliance with a water right. And as mentioned a little while ago, water right holders some types of water rights do require annual reporting requirements. And so we're assessing whether those reports are have any sort of violations or anything that require additional investigation. But not everything is in our purview. So we're also coordinating with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Water Resources for other actions when it isn't in our purview. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we're really relying on local communities and stakeholders to conduct some voluntary actions and educational outreach events for us this year. Fortunately, with the rains, maybe we'll have a bit of a buffer this spring. However, I don't see much rain in the forecast, so our fear is that it's going to be similar to last year, where we had a lot of rain and then nothing for 9 months or so. So some things we've identified as voluntary actions, possibly reducing diversions or pumping when you can, or coordinating diversion or pump timing. So as I mentioned, if everybody turns their pumps on at the same time, that's going to have more of an impact on surface water streams. We're also asking that growers in particular look into alternative frost protection methods, feasibility, economics, et cetera. We know from Russian River experience, for example, heaters or fans could be some alternatives that could be used. We're still investigating that and alternatives there. We're working with the Fish and Wildlife, CDFW and the county as well, Lake County, on stream channel maintenance needs, especially when we have fish passage barriers. And as I mentioned, we're reaching out to grower coalitions and individual farmers for possible pump backs where you pump groundwater directly into the stream. This isn't an exhaustive list. There's very well might be more voluntary actions. So please let us know if there's anything else you think can be done. And we'll take a look and add it to this list. Next slide, please. But of course, we're a state regulatory agency out of Sacramento, so we really need your help to bring the word to the Clear Lake community. So we need your help sharing the message. We're going to continue having these types of listening sessions. This listening session and the one from 2 weeks ago has been recorded. Last listening session is up on our website. Feel free to share that link to anybody who hasn't been able to attend. Hopefully we'll get this one up for you by the end of the week or early next week as well. And then work amongst yourselves or coalitions to identify local solutions that might be implementable or able to implement. And we're asking for data sharing. Share data with neighbors, provide it to regulatory agencies. If you haven't been collecting data historically, we're going to ask that you start collecting and sharing data this year. And we're also looking at funding needs. We know some of these solutions might not be very easy to implement for a lot of entities or interests in the area. So we need your help identifying who needs help. And there are some funding opportunities that we can link you to. And we're continuing to identify more funding opportunities, a lot of which has come out of the drought-related funding. Another possible solution may be developing some off-stream storage ponds for more long-term use. So we're not relying completely on groundwater and groundwater pumps when irrigation or frost protection needs are needed. We do have a permitting group in the Division of Water Rights, and we're happy to connect you with those folks to better look into this solution. Next slide. But as I mentioned, we are a regulatory agency, so we are looking at regulations that we can implement short-term and long-term. But before we do that, we need some data. We need some data interpretation and analysis, so we still have quite a bit of work to do. I mentioned, groundwater use. We're looking at diversion sizes, how much water is being reported, making sure that reporting is up to par with the permit and there aren't any reporting violations, and where there are, we're following up and enforcing where necessary. And then when we step out of our purview, we're working with other state agencies like the Department of Fish and Wildlife for things like stream bed alterations, fish passage structures or barriers, and other sorts of actions that could help with fish migration upstream. And I think next slide, please. And I think with that, I will hand it over to Jennifer with California Department of Fish and Wildlife. As I mentioned, not everything's in our purview, so we will need some help in coordination with CDFW. And Jennifer's going to talk a little bit about their permitting approach and some other actions that they'll be taken or will be available for. So I'll hand it over to you, Jennifer.
Awesome. Thank you, John. I
You
appreciate
bet.
that. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Jennifer Garcia. I am an environmental program manager with the Department of Fish and Wildlife out of our Region 2 office. Just wanted to go over some of the basics of kind of the CDFW consultation and permitting processes. Big slide up here. I'll try to make it short and sweet, but what we really do as an entity, as an agency, is to ensure the health and well-being of our wildlife species for the state of California. So that comes in a variety of fashions. The most prevalent on the stage is that we review and we authorize projects that can alter the bedbanker channel of any water course. It doesn't matter how big or small. It's lakes, streams, everything in between, and that is through our Lake and Stream Bed Alteration Agreement program. And it pretty much regulates a variety of things. We'll talk about it on the next slide, but keep in mind that regardless of whether or not you have, let's say, an existing project that you need to get done, or whether you already have something that's been in, let's say, a lake or a stream bed for years and years, alterations to those at that time would still need to have some type of consultation and permitting from our agency. So really, it doesn't matter how long something's been on the landscape. It needs to definitely be permitted appropriately. For the balance again of both your needs and for species and water needs. We also oversee the permitting and provide recommendations for the California Endangered Species Act. The Clear Lake Hitch is a threatened species, so therefore it has a very high level, high status of protection. And so activities that are undertaken within watersheds or water courses where we have a CISA listed species require a little bit more oversight and a little bit more consultation to provide ways to avoid impacts to species. Or if there is no way to avoid those impacts, we provide what's called an incidental take permit. And that permit requires typically some mitigation, some balancing of thank you. That's the next slide, of making sure that the species is conserved in a way in which we don't have unnecessary take or degradation of that species. So do you need a permit? Pretty much anything that is undertaken that is within the bedbanker channel of a stream bed or a lake per se, should have permitting from our entity, from our agency. That can be any of these bullets and more, but the typical projects that we see, construction or maintenance, roads, bridges, any type of water course crossing, installation, replacement of culverts, the use of water from any water course. I'll come back to that diversion. Obstruction or change of the flow of water. I'll come back to that as well. Disturbance or alteration to the bedbanker channel, and often that means adding material into a water course and or pulling material out of a water course. And then, of course, impacting CISA species. So from the perspective of fish and wildlife, if you are diverting water from the surface level, so not groundwater pumping, but if you are surface level diverting water within these water courses, technically you should not only have a water right, but you should also have a diversion permit with us. These water courses, because of the lack of water that is sustained, makes it potentially significant when that water is diverted. And so oftentimes the permit will allow for water to be diverted at certain times of year, and then not allowed at other times of year because we've got sensitive species within the water course. As John mentioned, with the water board, oftentimes we prefer for people to divert water when there's high flows and divert that water into an off-channel storage pond, where then that water can be used later on and not impact the existing water within a stream at a certain time of year. So a lot of variables. The obstruction or changing of water dams are really a big issue. A lot of diversion ponds or dam structures have been placed into these water courses, and they do not allow adequate flow downstream to keep fish in good condition, nor do they allow full fish passage upstream and downstream. Both of those are required by regulation. So regardless of whether you have a permitted structure or not, in order to be in compliance with both of those regulations, your structure must allow for fish passage and must allow for flow. So that's something that we are trying to really balance with a number of older infrastructure issues. Some of them are counties, as we've talked about, flood control. Some of them are private. So we're just trying to find that happy medium right now with ensuring that people have that fish passage, even if they don't have a permitted structure. And we have mechanisms to allow folks to get into those water courses and get that fish passage and still be able to keep some type of storage detention and things like that. So again, a lot of opportunities, but what we always recommend is consultation. Get in touch with us. Let us know what you have going, you know, within your property, within your water course. The question was posed a little while ago, maybe during another listening session, about whether or not the county was responsible for some level of maintenance. And really, from our standpoint, unless it's county property, and if it's your property, it's probably your responsibility in order to be able to ensure that you have adequate flow of a water course, and not only for the passage of fish, but also to protect your own home. You don't want things building up in the system and all of a sudden coming onto your property. So often we have questions about, well, what do we do? Talk to us. We have the ability to work with you under emergency circumstances to clear water courses and make sure that we're not impacting resources in a negative way by stirring up more sediment and things of that nature, but still allowing to, you know, kind of move things, as we say, kind of out of harm's way, so that we've got fish passage and we also have a stream bed that's functioning as best it can in kind of an emergency scenario. And this year is one of those with all of the water we've finally received. So the other thing I wanted to make sure I brought to everybody's attention is that we have been working very closely with the water boards and trying to kind of get a better understanding again of diversion use, both above ground and below ground. We've done some enforcement actions. In the last few years, we've actually had quite a few cannabis enforcement related actions, actually 68 violations since 2018 within the watershed. So we acknowledge that there are a number of different kind of, I would say, agricultural perspectives that as an agency, we are attempting to kind of coordinate our efforts and our outreach. But again, I think what I want to bring back is that everybody needs to be on the same page about the fact that regardless of what infrastructure you might be building or maintaining, they really need to have fish passage and have flow below a water course. So I will put in the chat some information from our Lake and Stream Bed Alteration Agreement website. We also, similar to the water board, are a complaint-driven system. And so I will put in the information for CalTIP. So if you happen to see activities occurring, you know, within a stream bed that just don't look right, by all means, please let us know, because those types of things often go on for years and then they end up impacting the health of the watershed altogether. And we need to kind of work as a community right now to do the best that we can to get, as I've said, water in the system. So happy to answer questions later on as we move through, but just wanted to give everybody kind of that broad overview of what Fish and Wildlife actively does. So I will pass it back to Val.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next slide. So this is sort of the wrapping up part of it. You know, we've been at this almost 2 months now. You're probably wondering, what have you been doing? And, you know, since early December. And I think John and Jennifer have really talked about some of the big issues, you know, data collection and analysis. You know, we've been listening to people, we've been engaging with the tribes, they've collected just a ton of data, coordinating with other state agencies and engaging with the community. You know, Jennifer is here talking about stream alteration because of those efforts, because the tribes identified that that Kelsey Creek needed a pretty, I think it was Kelsey Creek, actually I think it was Adobe Creek, needed a pretty high level of flow just for fish to go up and down the stream, because they were observing that fish were getting in, laying their eggs, the juveniles were hatching, and then they were getting trapped and they couldn't get out. These fish don't need that much water inherently, right? If there's enough water covering their backs, they can move. But if they can't get around a barrier, then they're not going anywhere, and those streams will dry up. So that's why we're talking about, you know, stream bed alterations and issues with the stream bed, because the water, you know, the amount of water that we need actually is less if the stream is in good condition. That's something that we figured out by talking to folks here. So this is one of the things. You know, we've been coordinating with a lot of other, you know, even the federal agencies. We have a task force, we have an implementation team. Like, the groups that are involved are numerous. But you know, the bottom line is this. You know, we know we've had some rain this year, and you know, I hope, and I think many of you hope, that will help with the issues with Clear Lake Hitch, at least for this year. But the Hitch have been in decline for, you know, 50, 60, 70 years, probably longer. We know this. This problem isn't going away with one wet year. So we are going to continue these efforts, even if this year turns into just an awesome water year, tons of water. We're going to keep working on this issue, because there are, you know, short-term problems and long-term problems. And some of the probably the best solutions to this are going to take a longer-term effort. Things like getting fans, identifying areas where, you know, we can maybe reduce water use or move it away from the stream. You know, if there's removing of barriers, if there's, you know, maintaining the riparian habitat, whatever it is, those are long-term issues. So we're going to keep working on this. We're not going to go away. Just letting you know. So this is the continued engagement with this community. Next slide, please. So, you know, this is just to sort of pause and let you know where we're at. Like, what are we doing? What's going on? What are our drivers? You know, those of you who have been listening to us for a month now, we're probably like, what's new? What have you figured out that's new? We did visit the watershed. We have been shown around by several groups, farmers and tribes, and I really appreciate their insight and their efforts, frankly, in trying to deal with these issues. I do genuinely believe that everybody is interested in solving this issue. You know, some of the things we're looking at is we're starting to dive into the frost protection data. Like, we're hearing, you know, a couple different things. One is we're hearing that, you know, there aren't that many frost protection days, like 5 or 6 per year. Maybe that's true. We're also hearing simultaneously that it's too cold to use fans. Fans they stir up the air. Basically what happens is on the coldest nights, the air tends to be very still. Cold air sinks to the bottom of valleys, and it tends to be colder in the bottom of valleys than on the hills. And so some places, like Sonoma County, for example, regularly use fans to stir up the air, and that is enough to protect the crop, particularly grapes. Does that work everywhere? No. Does it work every night? No. Can it work some of the time in Lake County? Probably. And so that's something we're digging into. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're looking at the drivers, and we're going to keep working on this issue. So next slide, please. So what we're hoping to get is some voluntary actions. Any way that anybody can reduce diversions or pumping would be great between February and May. Any alternatives? We're looking for people to sort of coordinate. You know, maybe somebody over here is doing something over here that needs to coordinate with their neighbors. That would be great. Again, John talked about data. And then, of course, you may have neighbors that maybe aren't online or maybe aren't here tonight, that aren't aren't as aware of this issue, and we hope that you'll be talking to your neighbors and to your community. So we would like that to happen, and we will attend meetings. If you have a meeting, if you have a group, we would be happy to come and attend. So that, let's do one more slide. I think we have one more slide. Yeah, okay, so this is the Q&A part of the presentation. This wraps up our staff presentation. And I know that we have some questions in the chat, and I am going to pass this on, I think, to Jessica to start figuring out where the discussion should start based on what's in the chat.
Thanks, Val. We do have some specific questions, and then I also want to invite folks who are our attendees on the webinar today. If you have comments you'd like to make or questions you'd like to ask and you would like to raise your hand to do so, you can do that, and we can unmute you so you can ask your question or provide information for us. So please feel free to do that. But let's see, if we go back in here, there was a question that I think may have been addressed. This is for Jennifer. Sorry, I'm scrolling through. It was about the lake and stream bed alteration requirements being grandfathered in. And Sarah Ryan asked, does that mean that nothing is grandfathered in regarding LSA requirements? And Sarah, I don't know if you want to maybe come on and help give us some context into what specifically you were asking about that might help Jennifer answer.
Well, I just want some clarification about it. Thanks, because Jennifer did say if it's in there, it needs to be, it needs some sort of paperwork and permits. So just want some clarification.
Yeah, so there are multiple, diversions, potentially dams, ponds, things of that nature. If they were built before a time in which the LSA permit process even existed, there is the quote grandfathering in. They don't need a new LSA agreement. However, they must still meet by law and regulation 5901 and 5937. So they must still provide fish passage, and they must allow adequate flow downstream.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah.
We also have another question here, and I don't think we have anyone from DWR here on this, but the question is, does DWR know and check for the Fish and Game Code sections that you mentioned when they are inspecting dams? How is that code being checked and enforced? So I don't think we can say from DWR, but can you say anything about other enforcement or checking how that happens?
Yeah, I don't know that I can. I'm not sure. I have dealt mostly with FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and their dams versus DWR. So I do know that there are different infrastructure requirements, and therefore potentially our regulations may or may not coincide with how DWR operates. So that I do not know.
Okay, well, Angela, we do coordinate with DWR, and we're making notes of the comments that we can't answer, and then we can talk to them and see about finding out some additional information. So if you are interested in following up with us, I'd love to get your contact information. Okay, let's see. I don't see any other questions in here. And I don't have any other hands up at this point. Let me see. So if there are any questions from folks or comments. It's late in the evening. Maybe people are a little slow to the Zoom buttons if they have them.
Yeah, I see Sarah's question. How do we define adequate flow for fish passage? So it actually depends upon the riverine system, the stream system. If it is a system that has is a fish-bearing stream. So fish is a different definition. It's not just fin fish. So fish could be a crustacean. So it actually depends on the fish within the stream system to keep them in good health. And so it's actually could be literally a stream by stream measurement of adequate flow. So our feeling is, and this is not the science behind it, this is typically going out in the field and saying, you need to be bypassing you can't take all of the water, right? You need to be bypassing an adequate amount to make sure that there is some level of depth in that stream system. As it goes through the year, we all know that that becomes less and less in the summertime. So we typically, similar to probably the water board, have actually recommended and or required people, especially let's say in the timber industry, they have to have a gauge in the water to measure the level of flow at that time. And they can never take more than half. And it might be bumped up to more than that, dependent upon the system for which they're in. So gauging is the best way to ensure that you have what we consider adequate flow and not be taking everything and leaving a trickle behind. But good question. And there is no perfect science to it. We have no actual CFS to determine every water course under one umbrella.
Thanks, Jennifer. It looks like there's a question or a comment from the Lake County Farm Bureau. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me, Jessica?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I was just wondering, and I don't know who this question would be best suited for, as we move forward with solutions and, identifying what we can do, in a portion of that look like? I know we've talked about harmful algal blooms and other factors that potentially affect the Hitch. And so I know we've been focusing mostly on stream and tributary issues. It's also important to focus on the in-lake issues as well as we look at kind of long-term solutions. So what do we think that's looking like right now?
Yeah, and I can't speak specifically to the lake issues because a lot of that work is being done through our regional board. And actually, I should look to see if we have any regional board folks on the call who might be interested in speaking to some of those other items. But we're doing the HABs work, and there's the blue ribbon panel that's doing work as well. So that's certainly there are actions that are happening. We aren't necessarily tied into them right now. However, we're aware of them and we're engaging and coordinating with those groups as well. And I don't mean to put Anthony on the spot, but Anthony, did you have anything you could say about that from the regional board side?
Yeah, Jessica, I'm actually with the Division of Water Rights. I'm with the state board.
I'm sorry, it's a different Anthony. We had a different Anthony last time. Sorry about that. I apologize.
I think the Farm Bureau question also was asking like a little bit more like long-term and short-term, like more specific actions. And I know there's more problems there in the lake, but for a specific action, here's an example. Short-term, if there's more than one water source on a property, if more than one well, for example, and one is right next to the stream and the other one is, 2,000 feet away from the stream, use the one farther away from the stream during the Hitch spawning season, if that's possible. That's the kind of short-term action that we would be looking for. Long-term, on a bigger property, maybe there's opportunity to construct a pond where we could, fill it during the winter, during these big flow events, and then draw from that during the critical spawning season rather than pumping groundwater. And that's a permitting thing, and that's a big deal. But we at the State Water Board, we have some, they're not super easy processes, but they're also not as hard as the full-on water rights system. There is a streamlined process. So we'd be looking into ponds, we'd be looking into water tanks. We would be, if data show that some of the year a frost protection fan might work, and maybe it doesn't work the whole time, maybe it doesn't work in March, but maybe it does work in May. And maybe May is when we end up worrying the most about it, because that's when the juveniles are trying to get up and that's when the streams are the most dry. Like if the fans work in May, maybe we'd be looking at hopefully getting some funding or installing fans on properties that maybe are adjacent to the stream. Maybe those are the most critical, right? If you're right next to the stream and we can put a fan there and it works in May, fantastic. So that's the kind of long-term thing that we would be looking at. Those are just some examples.
Yeah.
And I can speak a little bit. Yeah, I can speak a little bit to the water quality questions. I think that was Rebecca from the Farm Bureau that was talking. So water quality is usually mostly handled by the regional board, the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board in this case. So I know there is, which if this is Rebecca, I'm sure you work with the Irrigated Lands Program quite often. So as part of the Irrigated Lands Program, there is some groundwater quality measurements and monitoring and surface water monitoring they do need to do as part of that. So irrigated lands will be involved. The regional board also has in their planning unit a harmful algal bloom set of staff that go out to do measurements and analysis and responding to any harmful algal bloom outbreaks throughout the state, actually, or throughout the Central Valley anyway. So the water board also has a HAB group, or harmful algal bloom group. And there's also total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, the acronym. That's also the Central Valley Water Board, and they're looking mostly at like mercury issues going into Clear Lake. So those are the groups I believe involved at the Central Valley Water Board. So Central Valley Water Board, Regional Water Board, they're more water quality. Us at the State Water Board, we are more water quantity. So we're looking at volumes of water.
Right. Yeah. And from the DFW side of things and our fisheries biologists, I think our hope is that we can avoid as best possible, the use of pesticides and rodenticides, and tilling of the earth at times in which it will be washed away and then into the lake. All of that kind of impacts the availability of that dissolved oxygen, and really impacts the health of the lake in and of itself. So timing is a big factor. And that's agriculture, again, across the board, and cannabis as well. So, fertilizers, those types of things, they have a very immediate and very high level of impact on lake health.
Rebecca, did that adequately give you an answer? We had a lot of people talking, so.
Yeah, so I mean, that doesn't really answer what I was, wondering specifically. I was aware of the strategies, short-term and long-term, with regard to, water use and water quality, best management practices, et cetera. So that's definitely not new on my radar. I don't know that answers my question, but I'll suffice.
Well, because if you wanted to clarify a little bit more, I mean, we want to make sure, again, this is supposed to be a discussion situation. So if you wanted to, ask a little further, dig a little deeper, we're happy to try and address it. But I also don't want to put you on the spot if you don't want to do that. So it's up to you.
Yeah. So I think maybe it was interpreted that I was asking that definitely wasn't mine. But I guess I was just wondering, as far as a coordination aspect, right? Like, we've talked about how many different facets there are to this issue, in lake issues being one of them. And so I was just hoping that maybe somebody could speak to coordination that's occurring. That and I want to there. So I mean, maybe if there isn't another answer to that question, that certainly is okay.
Rebecca, you were kind of breaking up, at least for me. I don't know if that was for, I'm seeing some nodding heads, I think so, but I'm hoping I got the gist of your comment this time. And so you're wondering just about coordination between, I think, the different groups that are working on these different things. I can say that we are doing internal coordination in a variety of different ways. We have an implementation team that's meeting, that's across the state agencies and federal agencies. And so we are looking at things, both what we can do from the water board's perspective, as I'm sure CDFW is doing, but then also looking at what we can do holistically together. One of the things I will say that we're working on right now is kind of a combined look at what funding options are potentially available, so that we can identify what the needs would be and get together from all of the different state and federal agencies and say, here is the slew of funding options for the area, and be able to provide better detailed information about the types of projects that would be eligible, what you would need to do, who would have to apply if there's technical assistance available, those types of things. And it looks like Rebecca may have dropped off. So fortunately, we're recording this, and we can always follow up too, but for other people to know, So looking at those types of things that we can coordinate on, and so that we aren't working in a vacuum. I think Jennifer and I have been talking a lot about the different permitting requirements. We've also met with the county to find out about what's the county's a role in these different things. And we're talking about also doing the county's talking about a listening session that we will all participate in as well. So the benefit right now with things being kicked off, is, at least from our perspective, in December with the emergency summit that the tribes held, is that we've really been, we're drawing a lot of resources into this to start looking at what the options are from a state level, not just from, let's say, the water board's level or CDFW's level. I think that we're seeing a lot more of that coordination, and we want to continue doing that going forward. And unfortunately, I don't think Rebecca's joined us again, but we are also communicating with her so we can follow up too. Are there any other questions or comments that folks would like to raise? We are, let's see, seeing some things coming in through the chat. Let's see. Sherry saying here from California Indian Environmental Alliance, happy the Hitch are being supported and that seasonal flows, pesticides, HABs, and solutions are being considered. Happy counties and agencies are all being pulled in. Thank you, Clear Lake Tribes, for emergency session. What about PFAS post-fire? Well, I don't know if we can talk about PFAS. John, do you know anything about that?
I do know quite a bit about PFAS. Yeah, that's a good question. I know PFAS right now, I don't know if it's being required to be sampled for in the lake, probably not. It is being required for municipalities to sample. So any drinking water wells, at least at the municipal level, maybe not at individual domestic wells, will need to sample for PFAS. I think by the end of this year, the United States Environmental Protection Agency is supposed to have a maximum contaminant level for a few PFAS constituents. And I think the state of California is maybe a year behind that. Levels are very low, like, I don't know, 5 to 10 parts per trillion. It's pretty incredible. So we can look into that. That will be more of a regional water board or division of drinking water realm though, but or landfills, depending on where we're looking, or airports. But we can follow up on that, the PFAS question with the regional board.
Thanks, John. We have another comment. Sarah Ryan says, we just saw a vineyard that was completely frozen at 11 a.m., icicles dripping off the vines. What are you doing to prevent water waste like that? Let's see. Sorry, I'm reading through some of these. Sarah, we, frost protection or using water for frost protection is still considered one of the beneficial, or it's a reasonable use of water. And so we're looking at those types of things. And so we're looking at the data to see how frost protection could be impacting the streams. That's one of the areas that I think we mentioned we need more data for right now. And we're asking folks if they can share information about their frost protection practices and when they're doing it. And then also, how the groundwater pumping is occurring and those things. We are looking into that as a possibility, but it's not something that we have enough data on right now. Val, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in on any of that with some of the data you've been looking at.
Yeah, okay. So question about, you're asking whether frost protection, whether we can see it in the data? Is that the question?
Well, Sarah's concerned about seeing frost protection
yeah. Okay.
Recently.
Well, yeah, this is a tough question, right? Can we stop it? No. Can we maybe reach out to those folks and have a conversation? Perhaps, yes. I need to do a little more research about when the frost protection is happening. And we need to figure out, was it cold enough? It has been pretty cold lately, right? So, if there's a need to do frost protection last night and you're seeing icicles, to me, that indicates that there probably was actually a need for it. Does it need to have a ton of water on icicles? You know, the volumes required are not something I'm an expert on. I do know they need quite a lot of water to do frost protection because, I mean, the way it basically works is that, you know, it takes a lot of energy to freeze water, and by requiring that water be frozen first, that protects the plants. And so I guess I'm not surprised to hear that there was frost protection last night or the night before. It was pretty cold. You know, we may not be able to stop frost protection at all nights of the year, especially if last night was super cold. If it was 25 degrees, there's not a lot of options that are not a lot of good alternatives. So that's probably not the answer you want to hear. But, you know, we do also know that the streams have been running pretty high, which is good. And we want that frost protection to happen as little as possible. So, you know, as we move into the spring, I would expect that those nights that are cold enough to freeze wouldn't be as cold as perhaps last night was. Maybe they're only hitting 32 or 31 degrees instead of, I'm not sure how cold it was last night, 25. At that level, you know, maybe the need to run the water is less. Maybe you need to run it for fewer hours. Maybe we need to run it. Maybe some of the alternative methods start to come into play. And granted, we do know that there are some fans in the valley. They are being used not just for repairs. And so that's kind of a longer term thing where, you know, if places are using frost protection 100% of the time now, and we can get them using it 40% of the time in 2 or 3 years, you know, that's a good thing. I think that would be good. In terms of streams being dried up immediately from wells, yeah, if there's a well right next to the creek, there is some potential for that. We don't have a lot of stream gauges, and so that's a tough thing. You know, if the well is a mile, half a mile from the creek or quarter mile from the creek, is it going to dry it up right there and then? Probably not. But the overall impact of using the water could actually have, like, basically all of those wells together could end up shortening the amount of time the stream runs through the spring. And maybe it would have run to May 30th, and now because of frost protection, it only runs to May 15th. That we could see that kind of effect. We could also see groundwater recharge, right? We don't know. Like if stuff's going on farther away from the streams, I would hope that the water would go on the plants and then maybe go back into the ground, and maybe we wouldn't lose as much as you might think. I mean, these are very complex questions, and this is why we're trying to get some real clarity on how the groundwater basin acts. And I'm hoping we're going to be talking to some experts about this, and it might turn out that some areas do have a greater impact than other areas. You know, wells that are super deep are probably not having as much of an impact as those that are shallow. It probably also depends on the gravel, like what kind of, you know, what's underneath the earth. Like, is it really fine sediments or is it coarse grained sediments? And so I don't know if that really answered your question, Sarah. I want you to know that we're looking into it, and we're, you know, I don't think the goal here is to completely get rid of frost protection. It's maybe to reduce it, I guess, to try to, in a reasonable way, if that makes any sense. Yeah, so Sarah's saying that it looked like a problem at the vineyard. Maybe it was. Maybe we just need to call them. Maybe that's the answer. If their pipe is broken and it's causing an issue, that's the sort of like, hey, my neighbor's pipe is broken and they're doing something that shouldn't be going on. That's the kind of action I think that we can take in the short term, where this is where we're asking for cooperation. You know, if you see that your neighbor's pipe is broken, and you can call them, or you can call me and maybe I'll call them. Maybe that's something we could do. We could find out. Maybe we'll talk about that maybe offline. Yeah.
Thanks, Val. It also looks like Michael Green, Lake County Board of Supervisors, is saying the UC Cooperative Extension Lake County has done a lot of research on this subject previously, not necessarily with more recent drought or fish aware concerns in mind. I'm hopeful UCCE can be involved moving forward to identify and reinforce best practices. And Val, you're in contact with them, correct?
We are working on, no, we're not yet.
Oh, okay. We're working on getting there on our list to contact.
They're on the list. We're in contact with UC Davis. We are absolutely going to be talking to the academics and coming up with a list of sort of strategies and understanding. This is not a simple yes or no issue, right? There are lots of nuances, and I'm not the expert. And I completely agree with Supervisor Green that we need to be talking to the UC Cooperative Extension. I think there's a lot of really smart people there that know a lot about this issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and they've been in contact with us as well. So
Okay.
it's a good collaborative, and I'm hoping it will really move forward quickly.
Right. All right. I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this point, and no new chats have come in. I do want to let folks know that we appreciate you for listening in. We're seeing some faces that we're starting to get to know and see pretty regularly. And I want to remind folks that we're here to chat with you and you know, talk about issues and concerns outside of just the listening session. So please, you know, ensure that if you want to chat with us, you are more than welcome to contact us. We have the email address there. But I think we can go ahead, Val, and maybe wrap up this portion and move on.
Yes, I think we can. I don't think there's any more slides, are there? Okay. Yes, there are a few more slides. You know, just to this is basically letting everybody know what we've been up to in terms of engagement. We are sincerely trying to talk to everybody in the watershed and everybody who's invested in this issue. And so we've been to several meetings. The only meeting we have scheduled right now is we'll be meeting with the Big Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency. So we are sincerely interested in looking at what they have, what analyses they've done, what kind of data collection they have. You know, I think that the short-term impacts are in the groundwater, surface water, groundwater issues are, you know, acknowledged in their GSA as being unresolved. That doesn't mean that they don't have some data and their model couldn't be of use, that we could dig into it a little bit deeper. We want to go to other meetings. So if you have a group that is meeting, please let us know. We will come, and we will come in person if that's what you would like. So we would be very happy to meet with folks and have a conversation, figure out ways to help. That is all I've got. I wanted to sort of put this slide is basically a thank you to everybody for staying up at dinner time and having a conversation with us. We do have a website that is listed. I also put it in the chat. On the website, if you scroll to the bottom, you can sign up for an email list that we will be using to inform people of things that are going on. I don't know if we've actually sent any emails via that list yet, but we will be, and we hope that you will sign up so that you can stay informed. We won't send tons of emails. We also have an email address where you can contact us. So the email address on the website is us contacting you. This email for specific question is you contacting us if you have a specific question or you would like something answered or you want to follow up with us. So please do that. It's very simple. Clear Lake Hitch at waterboards.ca.gov. And that's all I've got. And I wanted to just thank everybody for showing up tonight. And I think that's all we have for tonight.
Just one more thing, the Supervisor Green put this in here, but just a reminder that there is another, the emergency proclamation for Lake County is going to be considered on February 7th at the Board of Supervisors meeting for anyone who isn't aware of that already. So tune in for that as well. And it looks like that GSA meeting might actually be an advisory committee meeting. It may not be just a public meeting, just to be aware of. Someone let us know that in the chat. That's it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.